This week in IT SPARC Cast, Ubiquiti pulls a bait and switch, Microsoft hangs up on Skype, and too many admins are saying, patches? We don't need no stinking patches. Greetings and welcome to IT SPARC Cast. I'm your host, John Barger.
And I'm your host, Lou Schmidt. Let's see what's going on out there.
It's Friday, March 7th. IT SPARC Cast is a digest of the IT news over the last week with insights, opinions, and a little sarcasm from two experts, each with over 20 years of experience working in IT or for IT vendors.
And hey, today we're going to get you started with John and a hot take.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what. Oh, Ubiquiti, how you have betrayed us. So if you've been listening to us at all, you know that both Lou and I are fans of Unify and their suite. We've got it deployed all over the house, my house. Lou's got it deployed at his house. I've got spares. This is a U6 Lite. So if any of my systems go down, I can just replace it with this one. Matter of fact, if you're watching on video, I've got two spares right here. You can always switch off. And about, I don't know, a year ago, whenever they released their U7 Pros that had the Wi-Fi 7, I went ahead and deployed two of those. I have 6 access points around the house, including a couple outside that blanket the yard and all that. But I went ahead and put in the 2 of the Wi-Fi 7 access points. And they were great, except when I was roaming. If I was on the 6 gigahertz channel, if I would roam from one to another and go in between and drop out of 6 gigahertz and go to 5 gigahertz, that was causing issues for our devices. So I disabled the 6 gigahertz. 5 was pretty good. And I figured that once some of the cheaper devices, like the 7 gigahertz version or the Wi-Fi 7 version of the Lite came out, then I would buy some of those and deploy those, and then everything would be fine.
Everything is not fine, is what I'm hearing here.
Yes. So earlier this week, I was surfing around. I was actually on LinkedIn, and I saw an ad from Unify saying that their U7 Lite had just been released. So I got really excited. I went on their website, and I immediately went and I put in the cart 2 lights, and I decided to put 2 wall units as well because I wanted to play with those. I hadn't touched the wall units as well. And I was getting ready to purchase, and I figured, well, let me be a good IT citizen and actually look at the specs. Well, turns out that the U7 Lite does not have a 6 gigahertz radio. It's a dual radio, 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz only. And so I started thinking about that.
Why?
And then I dug deeper. It turns out there are 3 access points in the U7 line, the Wi-Fi 7 line, that don't have 6 gigahertz radios. That's the U7 Lite, the U7 in-wall, that's not the U7 wall, but the U7 in-wall, and the U7 outdoor doesn't have a 6 gigahertz radio either.
So if they don't have the 6 gigahertz radio, can we consider them Wi-Fi 7?
So that's a good question. So I went on LinkedIn and on X, and I posted a couple of polls, a poll on each. It was I asked for opinions, not technically according to the specs. And it was almost universally no. In my opinion, you really shouldn't call those Wi-Fi 7. The technical answer is yes, the spec allows you to release a Wi-Fi 7 access point without a 6 gigahertz radio. But in the comment section from both the polls and then some Wi-Fi experts that I reached out to, it's disingenuous, and it actually does a disservice to the customer, because in both Wi-Fi 6E and in Wi-Fi 7, the real benefit is that 6 gigahertz radio. There are some additional benefits in the way they handle some of the security features and the band steering, some other things, but it's that 6 gigahertz clear open space that's the biggest advantage over Wi-Fi 6 that you get in 6E and 7. So not having that is doing a disservice. And I understand wanting to save money and only supporting 2 radios. That makes sense. But if you're going to do that, have a software-defined radio. a software-defined radio is not really going to cost you that much more than a fixed radio. And with a software-defined radio, you can say, you can like maybe have a 5 gigahertz fixed radio and then a software-defined radio that could be 2.4 or 6 gigahertz. That makes sense. Or maybe 2 software-defined radios, and you could choose 5 and 2.4 or 5 and 6 or 2.4 and 6, whichever you want to do. And at the end of the day, if you're deploying access points the way you should for density purposes, for 5 and 6 gigahertz, you're going to turn the 2.4 gigahertz radio off on at least half of those access points, because otherwise they're going to start colliding with each other, and you're going to see too much co-channel interference. So you wouldn't need those radios on. So being able to define some of those radios as having two radio access points and having a 5 and 6 only makes perfect sense. But I'll tell you, I am so disappointed in Ubiquiti here. I'm not about to necessarily switch off of Ubiquiti, but I am going to definitely be thinking about them in a different light than I have before. So I also got through the grapevine, as I was talking to my experts, that Huawei is doing something similar. I actually haven't gone and verified that and looked on their site, but it's something I would say, look before you leap. If you're out there buying Wi-Fi 7 access points, or you're looking at anything, look at the sticker, read the specs before you buy something. I'm glad I did look. I mean, I was so excited. I was about to hit the button, and I would have been really upset if I had hit that button and actually got those things delivered and then realized that I had made a big mistake. But that's just bad news. One other thing I will say is I've been playing around with all the different AI agents. I have access to Grok. I have access to ChatGPT, both the 03 mini and the 4.5, and I have access to Copilot. And I asked all three of them, if you're not supporting 6 gigahertz, is it really Wi-Fi 7? I got 3 completely different answers. I will post those answers because they were pretty long up on X and on LinkedIn. So go look for me there and you'll see those answers. But they range from no, not really, to yeah, it's the specs, that's fine. But you'll see those up on that thing. Lou, do you got any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, Wi-Fi 7 does bring an increased density of modulation. So your modulation goes, your symbol rate may not be higher, but your symbols are more complex. You have a more complex map, which means you can get higher throughput even on the existing bands. But the thing to watch for, because what I've seen in our industry is usually somebody released a chipset that allowed this, right? Ooh, new cheap radio. And then everybody starts to ship these. So you're going to see these pop up in other places, I think. Look for how many spatial streams it supports. If an AP only supports 4 spatial streams, there's only 2 frequencies at work. If you're looking at a full Wi-Fi 7 implementation with 6 gigahertz, your access point should support 6 spatial streams minimum, right? More than that is good. Usually they dole them out depending on how much more bandwidth you want to have per slot you have in. But if your access point supports 6 spatial streams and it says Wi-Fi 7, you've very likely got a 6 gig radio in there. But now as John, your point is, cannot assume that. You see Wi-Fi 7, there might not be a 6 gig. That's
Definitely.
Right?
Yep. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on now with the news bites.
The news bites. Hey, welcome to the news. So since we got a whole bunch of infrastructure junkies talking to us, we're covering a lot of things today. The interesting thing is that we only have one extensive AI story, and our security story is kind of you've heard this before, but this is a new spin. But let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts of actually getting your infrastructure to work, something that we don't really think about much. And that is, how do you hook your buildings together? How are you hooking your remote sites together? Often we go for fiber connections, but there's folks that have to extend networks, usually in weird places, but they exist all over the place, where you can't get a fiber, where maybe you're in a country where just going through the paperwork to get a link from point A to point B is really, really difficult. Or maybe you have a geographical feature, like you have a network and a fjord in the middle, I talked to one of my friends this weekend about this. Definitely an issue. One of the new technologies that we've been working on for about 30 years now is something called FSO, Free Space Optical. And there was a really interesting article that caught my eye. Google Alphabet acquires companies and new technologies to increase the reach of the networks. They are a huge backbone player. Most people don't even know how much dark fiber they own, but they snapped up tons of it. In the early 2000s, when everything went bankrupt, first of all, the first bubble burst on tech, the second in 2008, they picked up a whole bunch of dark fiber. They may be one of the biggest in the world that way. But how do I bring in more networks to other? They've done other stuff like Project Loon, where they put this stuff on a balloon. They've been working with something. They purchased a company called Taara, and they just had a big breakthrough. So the announcement this week was they reached a critical point in data connectivity in the free space optics sector. So the reason that Google bought this company, Alphabet bought this company in their moonshot division, was they had a device about the size of a traffic light that used active optics that could put up a 20 gig link over about 20 kilometers. Now, for folks who've done WAN networking, that's a lot. That's a lot of bandwidth. Now, John and I, many of us probably have gotten into the whole like point-to-point link thing through Ubiquiti. Ubiquiti probably has the best, inexpensive, reliable, easy to manage point-to-point radio links in existence. You can spend $200 and get a good link. So back in 97, I did a link on something called a Canobeam when I was doing a show for NASA. And we used something, the Canobeam was an active optical connection from Canon and OC3, 155 megabits per second. That was a really, really big deal. What these guys did, what Taara did, is they took this shoebox, this huge traffic light size optical assembly, shrink it down to this. Think about that, right? This. So it's possible, depending on how much of the technology on the back end you need, this thing could be like the size of this, right? This is your optical assembly. Then you have all that.
For those of you that are on the audio stream, Lou's talking about something that's about 2 inches in diameter.
Yeah, it's actually like 2 or 3 inches in diameter. It could be really, really small. So what they've done, the Moonshot Factory Labs, they have successfully transmitted data at 10 gigabits per second over 1 kilometer outdoor using 2 of these chips. So they put the optical beam steering, the emissions and the reception, and all that stuff you need for active optics to correct for the atmosphere's warpage of the beam into these small chips, which means we're probably on the cusp of being able to build very high bandwidth mesh networks all over the place. So this is something you should keep an eye on. I would highly advise going over to the Moonshot Factory Labs page and taking a look at this. They believe they believe it's the first time silicon photonics chips have transmitted such high capacity data as outdoor at this distance. Their goal is 20 gigahertz, 20 kilometers. And this is a pretty big deal. This is a big step towards that. What do you think about this?
Well, assume I'm an FNG. Explain to me why FSO is so important. Like, why wouldn't I just lay wire?
Because you have to get permission to lay wire across lines you don't own. FSO, you take the shot and you're done.
Right. So you might have to cross a highway. You might have to cross a body of water. You might just not own the land. So this gives you the ability to just shoot it across, and you can cross somebody else's property. You can cross foreign land. There's all kinds of things you can do that just the barriers go away as long as you have visible line of sight.
You could be renting a building in another building, not have full access to the wiring, hang 2 of these suckers on the outside of a window, you're done.
That's it. It's great. I think this is exciting, and yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I've had to do like outdoor shots just in my house. At one point, I had an IoT device that was actually spraying an insect repellent out by my shed, and I couldn't get enough signal to it, so I used one of those old Ubiquiti back in the day. I forget what they called it; had a funny name, but and I pointed it over there, and I was able to get the Wi-Fi I needed over there. So that type of thing is definitely useful, and I can definitely see when you get these high speeds for commercial use, it'd be great. And we've seen commercial access for this. Lots of companies starting to provide internet access through a wireless form. I think this is a great way to get it. I mean, to get 20 gigabits per second, 10 gigabits per second over the air, line of sight, it's great.
This is optical, which means it's harder to snoop on,
Yeah.
but maybe that's not how they're snooping on you.
Speaking of snooping, so we've heard a lot recently about some set of emails coming out from certain groups asking, "What did you do over the last week?" And give me 5 things you did over the last week. We're not going to get into the politics of that, but it turns out that a lot of businesses don't really need those emails because there is a whole trend out there of monitoring going on for your systems. And a lot of you that are in IT are probably the ones that had to deploy these, so you may already know about them. But I figured it'd be really important to know about this. And then I'm going to talk about a more personal story related to this at the end of it. But there's a real growing trend on employee monitoring system. So there's things like time and activity monitors from applications like Hubstaff, Time Doctor, and TerraMind. And they monitor how long the employees spend on tasks. They track keyboard activity, application usage, and how much time is spent on various websites. So they're actually monitoring specifically what you're doing. And then there's these AI powered productivity metrics that talk about they evaluate the quality of your work, such as your customer service calls and analytics around automated performance scoring and on your sales pitches. So back when I was working in sales, I know that there were some of these tools that were used, but a lot of times they were used to help improve your sales pitch for our inside sales folks. They would monitor your pitch and then give you feedback on how to best do it. But I think in some of these cases, they're now saying, well, you spent 10 minutes on a call and then 45 minutes not doing anything, so therefore you're not doing your job. I'm going to move on, but there's a bunch of these tools that are out there, and there's a debate as to, is this actually productivity enhancement or is this workplace surveillance? And you know we're entering a weird time in our lives where surveillance is becoming more prevalent, and the the term that Lou keeps using is the BIS monitor, which is the butts in seats monitor, which is a big part of that whole return to office mandate and people being in the office. And that's how I know that you're working, is that I know that you're in the office. Well, now you don't really know that I'm working just because I'm in the office. So now you
Yeah.
are installing software on my corporate systems. There's just this whole back and forth, and I think it's this like war of attrition that just is going to end up ugly, and I'm really concerned about it. I'll tell you what. I'll tell you my personal story. I early in my career, right after college, I ended up as tech support for a programming language. And I had a gentleman that was calling in regularly, and he worked for a cardiology clinic. I won't say which one. It's a famous cardiology clinic, and he was writing the software. He kept asking this question. I was like, "Well, what are you doing?" And he was writing a keyboard logger, and it almost sounded like he was doing something nefarious. And so when I questioned him even further, it turns out that it was going to be installed in all of the desktops around the clinic, and they were actually making sure that people were working and that they were actually using the keyboards, and that's what it was doing. And it wasn't. So after I was looking at his code, it wasn't capturing the keys and logging what was being written. It was counting the keystrokes. And I was like, dude, this is pretty, insidious. This is, draconian. And he goes, yeah, I agree, but that's what I was told to do. So that's what I'm doing. And I just feel really, really icky about doing something like that. If I was told to write something like that, I'd probably start looking for another gig, honestly. If I found out that this was being done for me on me, I'm not sure how I would feel about it. What do you think, Lou?
Well, it's really interesting. I have some friends that are out in remote locations that take on call center jobs. And in
Yeah.
the call center jobs, they specify that you have to buy either from them or have in your possession a certain class of laptop. And then they give you the software hookup and they explicitly install this software on that.
Yeah.
They tell you they're monitoring you. I have another friend who remote works for an insurance verification type thing, and they are also tracking what you're doing. So this is for the what I would consider transactional jobs,
Hmm.
not uncommon. But it like they seem to be trying to to push this to everyone.
Well, so if any of you have been paying attention to our remote work series and the deep dives that we do and the support of remote work, one of the things that we keep pushing is that the success of remote work, and honestly, the success of any business, falls on middle management, and the middle management making sure that they are taking care of and motivating and getting productivity out of the frontline workers. And if that's failing, whether they're in the office or hybrid or remote, then the business is going to fail. And the failures that we're seeing that are driving Andy Jassy and Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan and all these others to drive people back to the office is truly because their middle managers are not managing their frontline workers appropriately. And at the end of the day, a good frontline manager, a good middle manager is going to know how productive their people are. And if that, I don't need a person that's working from exactly 9 a.m. to exactly 5 p.m. with two 10-minute breaks and a 30-minute lunch break and call that productive, right?
Mhm.
I need somebody that gets done what they said they got done and that we agreed was what would have been the output that we expected over the course of the week. And if you do that, then that's productive. And
Absolutely,
that
right? You got the
right.
job done.
And if you're entry level, then that productivity is X. And if you are more senior level, then maybe it's 3X because you're better at it. And that's how you measure that productivity, not that you spent X number of hours sitting in front of a keyboard and typing on something and so forth. So this is actually enabling bad management in my mind. And that's why I wanted to highlight this, is not because this software exists. So most of you, if you're in IT and your company's using it, then you already know about this stuff.
You know this stuff is out there.
But at the end of the day, this is the enabler for bad practices. This is, I'll tell you what, I'll give you an analogy here. I am terrible at spelling. And the reason is that when I was 12 years old, we got a computer, and I'm an old guy. I'm 55 years old, and you can see this little computer over here. If you're looking on YouTube, that computer right there, that's one of them, and it had a spell check on the word processor. And I would use that all the time, and that's what I wrote all my papers on. And I never learned to spell properly, so I'm okay at spelling. I'm actually better than a lot of people now that I pay attention, but I'm not as good as say my mom is. My mom's like an English wizard, and I feel like I'm horrible at spelling compared to her. And I blame it on the spell check because I leaned on it too much. I think that this is the kind of tool that managers would lean on and say, I don't have to pay attention to how much output they're doing because it's telling me what they're doing. They're spending this much time on Chrome on this website, and they're spending this much time calling this customer, and they're spending this much time doing this. So I know what's going on. I can lean back and not have to actually be a manager.
Maybe if we're using this as a tool to rate managers, it might be useful. Does
There
it
you go.
cut both ways? And that's the question. How are these tools being used? But speaking of tools that enabled the remote work, since these things actually tend to get deployed in that type of scenario, how many of you have heard of the news?
It's time to pour one out for a good
It's time
friend.
to pour one out, kids. So let me go ahead and bring you up. It's dropped in a couple of servers. I pulled it up on TechCrunch, but you could pull it up at a couple of places. Microsoft is finally hanging up on Skype. Service will shut down May 5th. So they kickstarted the market for making calls over the internet over 23 years ago. And they say 23 years ago it was longer than that. And John and I will tell you our stories. Skype is closing down. Microsoft, which acquired them 14 years ago, said it'll be retiring it from active duty on May 5th to double down on Teams. Oh boy, our favorite software. Oh, God, couldn't you just double down on Skype instead? But it's not clear how many people are going to be impacted by this. Most recent numbers Microsoft shared were in 23. They had about 36 million users. It's a long way away from the peak of 300 million, but there's still people out there that have the Skype number that goes to the actual telephones. And they're going to have to do that because that is not going to be supported in the free version of Teams going forward. I think, John, to me, the only thing scarier than Teams is free Teams.
Yeah. So, one of the things I thought we should do, and I was actually watching another podcast that I love, Daily Tech News Show, and they did this, so I figured we would just borrow from them and kind of go through and talk about, like an in memoriam, what does Teams mean from you? But before I talk about what it means to you, I'll mention, so when we moved into this house, 15 plus years ago, instead of getting a landline, or having what back then when we got our cable modem, getting a line through them, we just set up a line through Skype and Microsoft and got a telephone number through there that so we could answer it on software on the computer or on the phone. But I also had it forwarded to my cell phone and to my wife's phone. So we have what we call our landline, and we give out as our landline number, but it gets forwarded to our cell phones. And that's still active. And I mean, I think we're paying, I don't know, I think it probably costs us total like $100 a year for that service in the number.
That's pretty
But
reasonable.
now I got to figure out what to do with that. And I actually looked at whether Teams offers something like that. It doesn't seem like it does. So
It does not.
So I'll probably move it over to Google Voice or something. But so this actually impacts people, and it impacts me in that way. But Lou, what's your memory of Skype? Like what fond memories do you have of Skype?
Oh my God. I mean, I was on the internet before it was the internet. And then my first job at an OEM, right, that named with a very famous cooking grease, was doing product. This was before TMEs. Nobody had coined the term TME yet. You were a PME, a product marketing engineer. I was one of the experts on modems and dealing with like AS5200s, AS5300s, AS5800s. You now know the vendor, right? Large scale dial concentration. I freaking love Skype. Why? Most efficient voice codec on the planet. You could get a good Skype call through on a 9.6 modem.
Yeah.
You could do it. It was amazing. And because I was working at this big multinational company and we were all over the place, and I was dealing with a lot of people in Europe and Asia that were deploying these dial concentrators, if I wanted to have a quick conversation, Skype was the best.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, and when they come up with the video, they also had one of the most efficient codecs. That means that they get the most information, the least amount of space. And it was just really, really good. So pour one out, friends. I'm sad to see that one go. I really am.
So I'll tell you my personal story, and very emotional story for me was, so my son is 13, and when my wife was pregnant, I had a little bit of an existential crisis because I was in sales and I traveled quite a bit. And I was actually looking at a picture from her ultrasound. And I said, well, wait a minute. I don't know if I could actually go away for a week and not see this kid. Like I was looking at the ultrasound. I fell in love with this kid from the ultrasound. And I don't know what to do. And I was like, I need, and laptops didn't have webcams back then. And the iPad 1 was out. iPad 2 had not come out yet. iPad 1 didn't have a camera on it. And I found an Android tablet that had a webcam on it. And so I bought it and I installed Skype. And that allowed me to call, and we put a webcam on the we had a laptop plugged into a monitor in the kitchen. And so I could call and have my wife and baby sit there in the kitchen and talk to me. And that allowed me to
Wow.
stay sane while I traveled. I would have had to quit my job. I would have had to go do something different. It would have changed the course of my life if it wasn't for Skype.
Wow. That's
And
so
then
cool.
my parents, my dad's fairly technical, but they didn't have anything that could do that. So I found a device that was effectively a video phone that used Skype, and it was a device with a screen. It was like a 7-inch screen, and a camera built in. And I bought that. I sent that to my parents so they could see their grandchild because they lived in a different state, and so that we could do Skype calls with them, and so they could see their grandchild on a regular basis. And so Skype has a very personal history with me, and I'm very thankful for that. And then later I got an iPad, and the iPhone came out with its front facing camera, and FaceTime eventually came out, and all of that, and started using those. But started with Skype. Started with Skype.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah, it's a really good service. Well, you want to speak about old things being new again.
yeah, so let's go from something a little bit positive and a little sad. Let's go to something a little really sad. So
Oh,
now it's time for the CVE of the week.
and here we go again. So, uh, first of all, this one comes to us via Slashdot. Slashdot did such a great job that I am like almost completely ripping this off, but I'm going to put my own little spin on it. You're really going to like this one, except you're not going to like this one. So, I want to go ahead and say, we talk about CVEs. We usually try to talk about new CVEs. Let's talk about CVEs that are out there that have been out there for a long time and are still being exploited. And that's what this is all about. So I'm going to lead off with this message. Do not assume old bugs are patched, especially within the rubric of the cloud world, where we're using personal devices to access corporate class resources, as we talked about with the case in Disney, where somebody could break into your machine and get your password store and then use that to go into your job. So let me tell you what just got moved and then tell you why I think this is a really big deal. So CISA has warned US federal agencies about active exploitation of vulnerabilities in Cisco VPN routers and in Windows systems. So while the cybersecurity agency has tagged these flaws as being actively exploited in the wild, we don't have specific details on the activity itself and who's behind it. Added bleeping computer, which is where this came to Slashdot from. So I want you to pay attention to this. You're going to like this. The first flaw is CVE 2023-2118, and it's being chained with CVE 2023-225. And this is against the Cisco RV series of VPN routers. Now, CVE 2023 means this was discovered in 2023. What year is it?
I think it's 2025.
Right. What? What the heck? Right? Why is this still? So this was patched in 2023. So what in the world is going on there? All right.
So specifically January of 2023. So not even like December of 2023. This is January.
More than 2 years,
yeah.
Right? So the second security bug, which is CVE 2018, 8639, is a Win32K elevation of privilege flaw the local attackers logged into the target system can exploit to run arbitrary code in kernel mode, e.g. you're owned. Successful exploitation also allows them to alter data, create rogue accounts with full user rights, or take over vulnerable Windows devices, which, as we know, is many of them. You're owned, right? There was a security advisory issued by Microsoft in December of 2018. And this vulnerability impacts client, Windows 7 or later, and server instantiations, Windows 2008 and up platforms. So the two vulnerabilities have been added to the CISA database as being actively exploited. All right. So they're out there now, actively exploited. This is my security takeaway for you folks out there. we've all been the new guy, right? You come into a new organization, you may be a seasoned IT sysadmin or a network engineer or whatever. When you walk in the door, assume that the network is completely compromised. Just until you've scanned it, either ask to see the results of a scan or start to scan it yourself. There's open source tools like Nices and Nmap that can do network discovery and probing. OpenVAS and Saint also are open source, or you can do something like Tenable, which is really well thought of. There's just tons of security scanners out there. But if you walk into a new IT department and say, what is our posture? What are our scans looking like? Nobody can tell you. That's when you're vulnerable to stuff like this.
This should be obvious, but there's a reason that you got hired. So
Yes.
unless it's because of growth or because the last guy retired, then the last guy probably wasn't happy. Either they weren't doing their job and they got let go, or they weren't happy and they quit. In both cases, there's probably something that got dropped.
Hope for
Right?
the best, prepare for the worst.
Exactly. So if this falls under your purview, then you need to be extra diligent, especially coming in blind. If you don't know, and even if it's documented that we do a scan twice a week, do it again. Go deep.
And actually look at the result, because we've seen some breaches recently where the results, somebody ignored it or they said that was
Right.
that was erroneous or whatever. So what I'm asking you, maybe John, you as well, this week, pick up your security report and read it. Read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because we get so busy we don't. But now we see these are really 2-year and older flaws that are complete owns that are still out there being actively exploited.
Well, and then the other thing that's out there, you see this in a lot of cases, is I'll bleep this out, but there's a lot of attitudes out there, and I get this myself all the time, and the attitude is my shit don't stink. And so you get into that thing where I did everything I was supposed to, and everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes. Lou makes mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
You make mistakes, right? So just keep in mind that you might have made a mistake at some point. You might have missed something. Go back and double check. It's much better to double check and make sure and find a problem than to have your boss find a problem or have a breach or something else. Just go double check.
And especially to my friends that work in manufacturing or hospital environments, there are a lot of machines out there that run on older versions of Windows, and you can't upgrade them. You need to walk around and find out if these exist. Not only network scan, but walk around, because somebody is going to connect them either to the network or through a thumb drive that could be compromised at some point. You need to know where these things are.
Yeah, those IoT devices can be really nasty.
They're really, really insidious. You got to have them, and they're so small on compute resources that actually upgrading them becomes a major challenge. But know where they are, make sure you're protecting them. I think that just about does it, John. Don't you?
Yeah, I agree. So that's going to wrap up today's episode. We're really thankful for you. We couldn't do this podcast without listeners like you. Do you have any topics you want us to cover? Do you have any thoughts on what we talked about today? Send an email to feedback@itsparkcast.com. That's feedback@itsparkcast.com, or hit us up on X @itsparkcast. You can also go to LinkedIn and reach out to either Lou or me and give us your thoughts there. Be sure you hit like and subscribe, turn on notifications. If you're on YouTube, leave us a comment down below. We read every single one of those comments, and we reply to almost every piece of feedback we get, whether that's through email or commenting below. And that is going to wrap up this episode. We'll be back next week with more news and opinions from the world of enterprise IT. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.